I really didn't want to start Better Balance Orthotics. I had neither the time, the money, nor the motivation. In fact, when I got the call, I nearly turned it down cold. Sometimes life has a way of whispering to us that we need to do something, even when we don't want to. And this was definitely one of those times. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back when I was at university, in my final year of studying chiropractic, I met one of the most significant mentors in my life, Dr. Keith Keane. He introduced me to applied kinesiology, and he had a huge impact on my thinking, my direction, and my purpose in life. He was a total legend, and without him, I think the state of AK in Australia would be far different, and really much worse. I remember Keith saying to me, if you're ever going to use orthotics in your practice, the only ones to use are Dr. Ed Butterworth's. But at that stage, I was just trying to get my head around learning chiropractic, learning AK, passing exams, and entering practice. Orthotics weren't even on my radar, despite my lifelong flat feet. If I'd only known then what I do now about the permanent damage I was doing, maybe I'd still have an L5 disc, functional hips, and wouldn't have a metal wire holding in an abdominal hernia. In fact, when I had x-rays taken, my L5 disc was so bad that the radiologist said it was probably congenital, except it was fine on the previous set of x-rays. So, over the next few years, as I settled into practice, the idea of orthotics came up again. I hadn't forgotten what Keith told me, but I had no idea how to even find Dr. Ed Butterworth. So when a friend told me that a mate of his had started making orthotics, I thought I'd give him a go. Back in those days, we were using foam casting boxes to take a static mold of the feet. Although they never made any noticeable changes in my feet, I understood the theory that if we just pushed the foot into subtalar neutral, it should improve the alignment and function of the pelvis and spine. At that time, I didn't really have any symptoms to alert me to the insidious degeneration that was already occurring in my hips, my spine, and my core. I was fit and I was healthy, I was in my mid-20s, and I was rock climbing almost every day. I was always obsessed with creating better clinical outcomes, so over time, I explored a few different orthotic companies. When I came across the Orthotic Group, I was impressed with their scanning technology. Rather than just a foam box cast or a static scan, they used a Gaitscanner, a sensor that the patient walked over, which then recorded dynamic information about how their foot was working. In theory, this would produce a better orthotic. It certainly produced pretty pictures, with big red spots showing where the force was being poorly distributed in the feet and how the center of gravity was moving throughout the stance phase of gait. So I dutifully wore them and I prescribed them to my patients. I even told them, these orthotics are only helping you while you're standing on them, so you should wear them as often as possible. The theory all made sense, but I just wasn't seeing the clinical results that I wanted in practice. Of course, that was hard to judge because I didn't really have a way to objectively measure those results. Some patients did experience less knee pain or back pain, but I wasn't measuring posture. I wasn't measuring the vestibular system. I wasn't taking thermal images, and I wasn't using photos to track visible changes in feet, arches, bunions, pronation, and I wasn't using functional neurological testing, just symptoms. And over time, I was experiencing more frequent, more severe, and more prolonged episodes of lower back pain myself. Still not enough to seriously get my attention. Initially just a couple of episodes a year, but the progression was clear. And all this time, Dr. Keith's words about orthotics were quietly ringing in the back of my mind. So I decided it was time to track down Dr. Butterworth and find out more about his orthotics. The only way I could do that was to book as a patient in his clinic, which is what I did. I travelled over an hour to get there. It was probably the first time I'd seen a GP in over a decade. I found Dr. Ed to be a charming and fascinating man. He was clearly passionate about the work he was doing helping his patients with scoliosis through the unique orthotics that he'd developed. He showed me his collection of x-rays demonstrating clear improvements in scoliotic curves. Most of these patients weren't under chiropractic care. They had no other interventions apart from wearing his orthotics. The results spoke for themselves. He shared with me how his mission to help his own daughter, who suffered from severe scoliosis, had led him to investigate the discipline of Posturology. This was a small group of researchers and practitioners, mainly in France and Italy, who were working on improving posture through targeted stimulation of the feet. After his daughter's failed Harrington rod surgery, there was really nothing else that the medical world had to offer her, so this drove him to look further afield. At that time, in the late 90s, It was basically unheard of for a medical doctor to be using muscle testing, let alone consorting with chiropractors and working on the spine via the feet. He also shared with me his theory that the primary mechanism of action of the orthotics was through influence in the fascia. Again, this was something I hadn't heard anyone else talking about. At that time, no one was really talking about fascia. He truly was a man ahead of his time. I left his clinic impressed with his orthotics and committed to trying them myself. I was also committed to implementing them in my clinic if the results stacked up, which they absolutely did, to the point where my $15,000 Gaitscanner ended up gathering dust in my garage rather than being utilized in my clinic. And it's still there to this day, which really says something, because these orthotics weren't really easy, convenient, or sexy to use. With the Gaitscanner, patients got to walk over this impressive looking piece of technology, then they received a multi-page color report. And on our end, we simply emailed that through to the orthotic group and we received back a pair of orthotics, nicely branded with our logo and ready to go. When it came to Ed's orthotics, there were no fancy tech and there was no impressive report. There was no professional looking packaging. The orthotics actually came in a blank, non-customized form, and then they had to be hand-filled by one of my team members. It was a messy, laborious, inefficient process, and my team really didn't like filling them. To be totally honest, the whole thing was a pain in the ass. But they did have two things going for them, and those two things outweighed every other consideration. The first thing was their results. They worked. They created both immediate and long-term structural changes. Symptoms improved, but much more than that, posture improved, balance improved, bunions straightened, arches lifted, range of motion, pain, restriction, fatigue, all changed. Now, in my world, nothing beats results. I often tell my patients, don't judge it on the process, judge the results. The other thing that they had going for them was alignment, philosophical alignment, paradigm alignment. We were no longer propping up dysfunctional feet with a mechanical crutch. We were optimizing and rehabilitating the nervous system through a sensory input that created immeasurable, repeatable, long-term changes in structure and function. At that time, I hadn't yet coined the phrase the stimulation versus support paradigm, but I already knew this approach was a much better fit for chiropractic, philosophically, ethically, and practically. My Gaitscanner never stood a chance. However, not all of these understandings crystallized immediately. It was a process that unfolded over years of observing results and tracking changes. When I got the call from Dr. Ed suggesting that I buy his company, I was still largely using his orthotics for scoliosis, with a few knee, hip, maybe plantar fasciitis or back pain patients thrown in. At that time, I still thought we were treating various physical conditions, rather than addressing a universal environmental stress that humans never evolved to deal with, wearing shoes and walking on flat surfaces. Ed said to me, Andrew, I'm in my 80s and I'm ready to slow down. I know I have something here that will change the world, but I've just never had time outside of my medical practice to make it happen. I think you might be the person who can do that. Ed knew that I'd previously run a coaching company called Chiropractic Academy and that I had some ideas about business and marketing. When he said that to me, my first thought was, what makes you think I've got any more time than you do? The truth was, I really didn't. I had a busy practice, young children, and a full life. But even then, I already knew that nothing else like this existed in the world, and that it would be a loss to the world if it disappeared. And so Better Balance Orthotics was born. It wasn't an ideal transition. The plan was for Ed to retire from medical practice and devote his time to sharing his orthotics with the world. And then one day I rang to speak to him. His wife answered the phone and she just said through tears, he's gone. Dr. Ed passed away before he ever got to see his vision come to fruition. I like to think he's looking down and smiling when he sees what we're doing with what he gave us. So for the first year, we spent our time overhauling everything that was difficult or inconvenient about the business, which was basically everything. We updated the branding, the packaging, the messaging, the physical testing and prescription process, the ordering process, the science. The only thing we didn't touch was the product. That was already working amazingly. To this day, with everything I've learned since then, I still haven't found a way to improve on Ed's design. The other aspect that we went all in on was understanding the research and paradigm. I've spent years digging into the mechanisms behind why these orthotics produce the results that they do, and my mind's been repeatedly blown. Their impact and importance is so much bigger than I ever imagined, and the foot-brain connection is a direct result of that journey. Our goal was to streamline every aspect of the process, to make it as frictionless as possible, both for doctors and for patients. Ultimately, to get this unique technology on as many people's feet as possible. Because let's face it, if you live in the modern world, then life's better when you wear Better Balance Orthotics. That meant making a whole bunch of changes. It meant bringing the customizing and hand feeling back in-house. And I mean literally right here in our house. No more messy, laborious customizing orthotics in your own clinic. Now, all magic happens right here. We even have Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers personally overseeing the production of each pair. Every pair is hand-filled by one of our local employees. They include neighbours, members of our local rugby team, local single mums, and teenagers from our local Steiner school where my kids go. The people that we trust to come and go in our house whether we're there or not. It's truly a community effort that goes into every pair of hand-customised orthotics that end up in your clinic or on your feet. And those little snips in the bottom of every pair, they're not a defect. That's where each pair is hand-customised. Even the filler material that goes into each pocket is hand-produced. I share this with you for a couple of reasons. One is to honour the people who've been instrumental in creating the results that you and I get to see in our clinics every day. We're building on their legacy. We're truly standing on the shoulders of giants. The other is to share with you the value, care, and genuine craftsmanship that goes into every single pair. You're not prescribing some mass-produced, made in China, undifferentiated piece of crap. You're prescribing a simple but powerful, life-changing piece of technology with a real, innovative human history and a production process that supports local families and communities. It creates great results, and you can also feel good about where it came from. There's so much more I could tell you about our unique production process, including the lady who retooled her entire embroidery factory to produce Better Balance Orthotics, and who's agreed to take her first trip down to Central America to train our team when we move our production down there. But that's really a story for another day. But now I just want to thank you for being part of our story. Have a great week.